Marhaba. I would like to start this evening with some thank yous. First and foremost to the NYU Abu Dhabi Institute for hosting this event, to Arts and Humanities and Dean Robert Young, and of course to Literature and Creative Writing for coordinating these efforts. Also to Matty Silverstein for his support of the Common, and that support goes back some ways. My name is Marion Wren. I'm the director of the writing program here at NYU Abu Dhabi. And I also, in my spare time, edit a literary magazine out of the United States called the Painted Bride Quarterly. And the Painted Bride Quarterly is some years old. It was founded in 1973. It lives at Drexel University. It publishes poetry and fiction, and sometimes publishes translations. And it's that fact that we only sometimes publish translations that has me in a position of deep gratitude and general genuflection at the Common and the writers and editors who will be in conversation tonight. We are here to celebrate Tajdeed, the special issue of the United States literary magazine called The Common, dedicated to new Arabic fiction and translation. In the past 3 years, fewer than 0.5% of English translation came from the Arab world. The Common sought to expand the reach of this region's work, bringing previously inaccessible literature of thematic, stylistic, and political importance to a new audience. There are so few avenues of discovery for Arabic voices, says Jen Acker, who you'll meet in a moment. This volume can make a real difference in raising awareness of the exciting and varied stories being written right now across the Middle East. Co-edited by Acker and prominent Jordanian author Hisham Bustani, Tajdeed features the work of 31 contributors from 15 Middle Eastern countries: Algeria, Bahrain, Egypt, Iraq, Jordan, Kuwait, Lebanon, Morocco, Oman, Palestine, Saudi Arabia, Syria, Tunisia, the United Arab Emirates, and Yemen. Translated for contemporary English-speaking audiences, the issue presents a diverse group of emerging and established literary stars. According to their website, by the way, it's worth a visit, according to their website, this special issue seeks to promote greater cross-cultural understanding by providing English-speaking audiences with unprecedented access to a collection of strikingly original and compelling writers and artists rarely heard. Tonight, we are joined by the journal's editor-in-chief, Jennifer Acker, and Jordanian writer Hisham Bustani, as well as award-winning Egyptian writer Youssef Rakha, who contributed an introduction to the volume. This promises to be a rich conversation about the 25 stories representing 15 countries across the Middle East, as well as the topics of translation from Arabic to English, not to mention international artistic collaboration. It's a fantastic issue, and it will be available for you outside on a table after our conversation. But before we start that conversation, I'd like to make some formal introductions of the panelists. Then we'll have a Q&A together after they've done a reading for you. So a little introduction, some readings, some Q&A, and then we'll open up to conversation with you and the audience. First, Jennifer Acker, editor-in-chief of The Common. Jennifer has an MFA in fiction and literature from the Bennington Writing Seminars. She's a visiting lecturer at Amherst College, and in 2012 to 2013, she was a faculty fellow at New York University, Abu Dhabi. And that experience, I suspect, had a lot to do with the production of this issue. Hisham Bustani writes fiction and has 3 published collections of short stories: Of Love and Death, The Monotonous Chaos of Existence, and The Perception of Meaning. The German review Inamo has chosen him as one of the Arab world's emerging and influential new writers, translating one of his stories into German for its special issue on new Arab literature. Acclaimed for his contemporary themes, style, and language, he experiments with the boundaries of narration and poetry. He was featured in the 2012 issue of Poets and Writers, and if you do a little quick Google search, you can see some of his commentary there. Youssef Rakha is an Egyptian writer, essayist, and groundbreaking prize-winning novelist. Rakha is best known for his first novel, The Book of the Sultan's Seal, Strange Incidents from History in the City of Mars. And since 2011, Rakha has completed 2 other novels in a proposed trilogy on the January Revolution. One of the books is called The Crocodiles, another is Paolo, and the latter was longlisted for the Arabic the Arabic Booker in 2017. He's also started writing his first English novel. He's also a photographer and the editor of a bilingual literature and photography site named after his first novel, The Sultan's Seal, Cairo's coolest cosmopolitan hotel, also worth a visit if you're Googling around. Prior to writing the Book of the Sultan's Seal, he contributed to the coverage of Arab culture in English for many years as a reporter, literary critic, and cultural editor. First, I believe we will hear from, is it Youssef? No? Okay, Hisham. Yeah. Hisham will read for us first, and then we'll turn it over to Youssef.
All right. Thank you. So, thank you for having us. Well, just to give you a taste of the issue, I will just read 2 paragraphs from my story, which is published in the issue. And I think we'll hear part of the introduction by Youssef after that as well, and then the Q&A. So the story is entitled A Few Moments After Midnight. I will only read 2 paragraphs or 2 excerpts from that, 2 parts from that story. An extinguished cigarette is suspended between my fingers. I don't know how or who put it there, but I feel worms moving inside it. When I look at them, I imagine I've seen them before, tens of small bodies, identical without any features. The cigarette is a large worm ingesting and regurgitating the smaller worms inside it. They slither into my mouth, filling my lungs, and after a short, loud party there, they begin to flow with my blood. I don't know why I felt compelled to jump from the 3rd floor window. I don't know where that tree shot out from on my way down. And I don't know what made our neighbor go outside to hang her laundry at the moment that I fell. I don't know why I imagined that I died when I collided with the ground. I was happy at that moment of collision. I closed my eyes tight and slipped into something like a delicious nap. It took only a few moments until I heard one neighbor scream and realized something was wrong. I hadn't really died. I could still hear the honking of cars driving by. When I stood up and dusted off my clothes, the crowd surrounding me started to back away. Maybe I scared them. I heard one of them tell another with fear in his voice, "There are worms coming out of his nose." "They are not coming out," I corrected. "They are spilling." I left them and walked up to my apartment. I get up and walk around my studio. I see my unfinished paintings completed. Their faces are talking to me. I watch my empty canvases adorn themselves in color and strut around. On the couch, I find Monica Bellucci. I sit next to her, stroke her hair, touch her breasts, and have rough sex with her. There is noise outside. I go out, heading to the building opposite mine. On the roof, some teenagers who just finished their exams are having a party. Then the retired army officer living nearby disconnects the fuse box, and they drunkenly creep down the stairs one by one. The protest of irritated neighbors has dispersed, and I go back to the apartment, elated at the sound of music gone silent. My canvases are colorless again. As for Monica Bellucci, she is a picture on the cover of a magazine lying on the table. There is someone else sitting on the couch instead of her. Insomnia.
Hi. Thank you for being here. I'm just going to read the first page of the introduction, which is quite general, I think. I mean, not just about the stories in the issue. Sorry. On his last visit to Cairo, the German translator Hartmut Fandrich was despondent about the lack of interest in contemporary Arabic writing, and he offered this interesting explanation of Western reluctance to engage with Arabic literature. I think readers fear that it will destroy the 1001 Nights image they have in their minds. Mm-hmm. One might argue about the number of potential German book buyers who have the timeless classic lodged in their minds, but even those who do need not worry. No one writing today could possibly live up to the lack of sophistication, unadorned sensuality, and aimless fantasizing found in the 1001 Nights. Another possible reason for Western lack of interest in Arabic literature is the perception that as a culturally foreign backwater, economically and intellectually inferior, the Arab world can solicit only a political or anthropological interest, not a purely literary one. Books that do not pander to this preconception by presenting an exoticized or oversimplified pro-democracy perspective on Arab life are therefore ignored. Of course, we can assert that contemporary... I think there's a typo there. Of course, we can assert that... Oh, I'm sorry, yeah. Is that better? Yeah. Yep, okay. Of course, we can assert that contemporary Arabs are not really all that different from their Western counterparts. We can also decry the treatment of literature as a research aid. But the truth is that for many in the West, fiction has functioned as an enjoyable way into the political and social complexities behind all that disturbing news from the Middle East. The idea that a 1,500-year-old continuous tradition of writing might be interesting in itself for its literary merit, rather than for what it can teach us, evidently does not add up to sales figures high enough to justify expanding the offerings. But in The Dung Beetle, a short story by the Iraqi writer Hisham Bustani, who contributes The Abandoned Village to this volume, there's an alternative cue to affirming the relevance of Arabic literature, or else denying it, without reference to either Orientalist entertainment or geopolitical source material. This is the idea that this literature is at bottom a struggle to remain lucid in the face of encroaching insanity. I cannot write a story, says the travel-weary refugee hero of The Dung Beetle in his rambling soliloquy, but I'm ready to take up the literary issue to one end, for the dignity of those on the brink of madness. Thank you.
Thank you both so much for that. And I want to reiterate the landmark quality of this special issue of The Common. It's not translating Arab classics, right? It's translating contemporary fiction in a literary magazine. And right there, two out of the gate, two things. Not everybody's familiar with literary magazines, and certainly people in America might not be familiar with contemporary Arab fiction. So I want to open with that, maybe a two-pronged question. One, you call the issue, I'm going to say it wrong, Tajdeed?
Tajdeed.
Tajdeed, right? So why that choice? Why call it Tajdeed? And second to that is, can you tell us the story of the creation of this issue? Like, how did y'all get the idea for this? What were some of the iterations of it? And now that it's almost a year behind you, what do you see now? So that's a multi-part question. Discuss.
You want to speak to the title?
Go for it. Go for it first.
Well, I'll start with the story of how the issue came about, which is directly related to NYU Abu Dhabi. So it's wonderful to be back here, and I want to thank everyone for coming, and again, thank the people Marion mentioned and Phil Kennedy at the Institute. And it's really wonderful to be back because this issue started here. In 2012, 2013, I had the opportunity to be here for a year with my husband, and we got to be a part of this community, this remarkable community. And the Common was maybe 2 years old at that point. And so the Common is a literary magazine published in the States. It's published in print and online, and the mission of the magazine was to publish literature with a strong sense of place. So I was very interested in publishing works in which you could sort of feel the place that they were written about, in which the place mattered to some aspect of the story or the poem or the essay. So then when we were coming here to Abu Dhabi, I thought it would be great to have some sort of cross-section of contemporary Arabic writing in the Common, because literary magazines are of the moment, right? They are usually edited within, you accept something and then not more than a year later, it will come out. And so it's...
And that's of the moment.
Yes, that's pretty clear. Well, you publish online, it can be faster than that. Yeah. But I mean, it's not taking classics, or it's not book-length projects, but it is relatively timely. We're still talking print here, right. which takes time. So I had this idea to try to use this opportunity of my being here to publish this kind of literature, but I didn't really know where to start. I don't read Arabic. I wasn't familiar with the region, so that was obviously a very large stumbling block. And so then things happened sort of stepwise. I was going on a trip to Jordan, and just in doing some research before the trip, I came across some contemporary cultural happenings and things being published in Jordan, and I read a story of Hisham's, which was online at another literary magazine. So I wrote a blog post sort of summarizing some of the things that I saw happening in Jordan. Hisham saw that post and then contacted me and submitted a story for submission a couple of months later. I accepted the story, we worked together on the editing process, and then, again, I think some time later, he read an interview in which I had mentioned this ambition to do something with the Common that would be a special issue devoted to contemporary Arabic writing. So he followed up and contacted me again, and we sort of hatched this plan to work together to source the writing and to find the translators and edit them and publish them for an American audience. Have anything you want to add?
Yeah, well,
yeah. Sorry. Just the one thing is that this it took us 3 years to do this work, and we've now been working together for 4 years. And this morning was the first time that we met.
Yeah,
in person.
Yeah. Well, I will go and talk a bit about why Tajdeed and the title and what is, in my opinion, new Arabic fiction. But also I want to add that before I knew Jennifer, I had this conception about an anthology in Arabic containing new Arab writing. And the good thing, but the tragic thing is that the Arabic anthology never made it to print at all until this day. But the English version of it obviously got through, and it's now materialized in the Common. So that tells you, the tragic story of maybe how we deal with things in the Arab world, and how sometimes translation is an opening for things that cannot be realized in certain contexts. New Arabic writing, I put always quotation marks around new because it's not really new. I don't think there is anything new about art or science. I think all writers, artists, and scientists would always stand on the shoulders of those who came before. But I sensed that there's a new sensibility or a new sensitivity in Arab writing that is not surfacing. Something that goes beyond the realism or romanticism that, let's say, stamp contemporary Arabic literature as it's understood in its classical contemporary format. So there are new conceptions toward style, new conceptions toward theme. I usually mention people like Zakaria Tamer, like Muhammad Zafzaf, like Haydar, like even Muhammad Makhzanji from Egypt during the 80s. So actually these names are not new. They are not a new generation of writers, but they comprise a new sensitivity towards writing and new techniques in approaching writing, introducing what I call a sort of engagement with the reader where contexts are not fully drawn, but rather left to be interpreted in different ways by a reader. So I think this pattern of writing is more artistic, it's non-commercial. Mm-hmm. The market is not interested usually in in promoting such works. They are not bestsellers and so on and so forth. So usually they are lost in the literary world, if you want. And since I work within that context of on how to write, so I kind of thought that it's about time that some sort of recognition should be presented to this kind of writing. And also this kind of writing defies the stereotypes that Youssef talked about in his introduction, and maybe he mentioned it a little bit in his reading, where the Arab world is represented by either Orientalist fetishism, the camel, the Bedouin, sand, the oasis, the harem, and these kind of, or it's represented by this, violent, misogynist, terrorist approach, whereas this kind of writing defies all these, or dismantles all these stereotypes and actually portray the complexities and the different levels and layers of understanding that that comprise this whole body of literature. Mm-hmm. That is not out there and not represented.
Yeah. So is that how Tajdeed works then? It's sort of like rectifying that problem that these voices aren't out there, or pushing against the sort of stereotypes that readers might have of Arabic fiction, that this gathering of voices is a way to sort of just push against some of those expectations, or at least enter into a wider audience or wider readership. Is that the way you're?
Let's just say it's a way that both me and Jennifer are saying that there's many things out there. Yeah. Outside the stereotype, outside the superficial representations and conceptions about the Arab world and about Arab writing. I think what Youssef in his essay said about literature being not, in the West or in Europe and the US, Arab literature is not actually considered literature, but it's considered as either a way to fetishize about the region or to sociologically or anthropologically, look at the region. This issue defies all, challenges all of this and presents literature as it is, not as it is expected to be.
So can I push that just a little bit further and invite Youssef into this too?
Sure.
Can you name some of the stylistic features of this sort of new non-fiction, right? The new sort of creative writing, even though I take your point, what's new here, right?
Yeah.
Let's slap air quotes on new. Mm-hmm. But are there any features of the writing that's being done by this group of writers at this particular time that you can see or name? Did you see it while you were editing it, or perhaps even in retrospect, now that you look back at the issue? What is it that you see now? Youssef, yeah.
For me?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think there's a great deal of diversity,
Yeah.
which would be one of the features of. But just to comment on what Hisham was saying, I mean, it's not so much that there are set expectations for Arabic literature in the West, I think, but I think that the legacy and the situation makes it so that why on earth would you want to read an Arab writer, you know, in America or in Europe or wherever? I mean, I think that attitude is rather more prevalent than your attitude or Jen's attitude, you know.
Right.
And I mean, we can critique that, of course, at various levels, but I think what's interesting to me is that, you know, contemporary Arabs, including contemporary Arab writers, are normal, ordinary human beings, you know,
Right.
who can have sort of normal human exchanges, right? And why that isn't seen as a possibility, or why that's regarded as something that's so far-fetched,
Yeah.
is the issue. So I don't think. I mean, I appreciate what Hisham was saying, of course, but I don't think it's so much an issue of actual literature as it is an issue of perception of place and identity, and why we should be interested in a certain part of the world. I think the books that have been successful, the Arabic books that have been successful in the West, in Western languages, are generally more interesting as source material, as political commentary, or sort of journalism, native journalism, if you like, than they are as literature or fiction. And I think that's very symptomatic, that people aren't really particularly being read for what they're doing in terms of fiction or poetry or whatever, but they're being read because they provide information. There was this major article in the New Yorker. I can't remember its name now, but it was extremely kind of exemplary of this. I mean, it really demonstrated this attitude about Arabic literature, and I think it had a sentence that went something like. But responsible Americans for whom the news is not enough may benefit from, you know, such translations,
utility,
because
yeah.
then they'd have an in into these societies, and they work out how things really work, you know, to supplement the news. And of course, they have to be responsible Americans to be interested, which seemed very strange to me and quite offensive in its way, obviously, but very strange in the sense that why aren't these people regarded as peers, you know, as normal people who could be doing interesting things or could be doing irrelevant things. I mean, I don't think that all Arabic writing has to be relevant in the West, you know. I mean, some things are very, like the novel that I'm best known for example, is, I don't think works so well in English as it does in the original, you know, because it draws on, it plays with language and it draws on all kinds of legacies, and it, you know, so this is really done in an Arab context, and I don't expect it to be as well read in English. You know, I'm glad it's there, and it still works at some level in the translation. But I'm just saying, I mean, there is that sort of issue, which would be a perfectly understandable objection to specific Arabic books. But I think that the main problem is that they're not really being regarded as books in the way that Arabs are not really being regarded as human beings. You know, they're being regarded as subjects, as objects of study. You know, not even subjects, not in the French existentialist sense, but objects of interest. And so these books become, their literary products become objects of interest. And I think that takes away from all kinds of things, right?
Well, then that's the sort of radical intervention then, that the act of writing, creative writing, the act of inventive fiction, of imaginative poetry is a kind of world making, right? So that the author, the creative writer is inventing a universe, right, of character, of plot, of theme, right, which is so radically different than being the subject of somebody's gaze, or rather the object of somebody's gaze, right? That's an active art making that perhaps,
Or it could be playing with that gaze. I mean,
Yeah.
the other remark I wanted to make about Hisham's, about what Hisham was saying is that the Arab, I'd like Hisham to comment actually on what he means by the market when he talks about the market in the Arab context. But the Arab milieu is so tiny in terms of literature that it's often conditioned by Western interventions as well. So the fact that the anthology was published in English and not in Arabic is will be a demonstration of that. So it's not. I mean, I think it really matters how the West gazes upon Arabic literature, and it also matters within the Arab world, is what I'm saying. And so it's very important to keep these things clear, and to make these distinctions between what is being read as supplementary academic or news material, and what is being read as literature or fiction or for pleasure, right?
Yeah.
And I think the point needs to be made that that we are pretty much in the same human sphere, as whether we're Arabs or Americans or whatever, we really can talk to each other. I mean, it's not that hard, and we're not that different, and et cetera, et cetera. I think these points, and I think something like this issue of the comment really makes that point.
Yeah. And I would also say too, the late Cliff Becker, who was the head of literature for the National Endowment for the Arts, was a huge champion of translation, especially for contemporary fiction and poetry. He passed a number of years ago, and with our new president, the NEA is in crisis, and the whole question of funding for translation is fraught, right? So I really take your point about how fiction, in particular, or poetry, becomes a way of communicating across cultural division, but also the act of writing it, right, is a kind of energetic world making, right, that then becomes available to a reader. But then the question of translation, which is my next question for this group. Can you talk to us a little bit about what it was like to collaborate as editors, but then collaborate with your authors and your translators, because that sounds like a whole complicated matrix of things happening. So can you just shed a little bit of light on what that process was like?
It was complicated. It was. I just want to mention one thing, speaking to the diversity of the issue and trying to present these authors as simply authors and not bounded by any particular even historical tradition or even by any particular place. So when we were talking about how to organize the issue, we made the decision not to put the author's countries of origin in the table of contents or even next to the author's names, because we didn't want even that to be a filter. We just wanted to present these were writers, and you approach the story on its own terms, and you read it, and you make up your own mind. So if you read the bios, you can find out something about where people are from, and the issue is not organized by region; it's organized by theme, and of course that was these were loose groups of loosely themed. But so that sort of speaks to this idea of saying we're just going to give you stories, and you read them, and they fall between a bunch of other stories. You can see what you like and what you don't like. And then the translating and the editing, each piece was different. Hisham can talk to about soliciting the work and talking to people. We were looking for geographic diversity, so we would have a wide representation. But geography was just one factor. We were looking for, obviously, men and women and different ages, different styles of writing. And so when I would get the pieces and I was reading them in English and then working very closely, mostly with the translators, sometimes with the authors and the translators, to do this process of editing, which is a strong tradition in the States, and is not such a strong tradition in the Arabic publishing world. So I think that for some...
Kind of slightly obsessive compulsive in the States, though, wouldn't you agree?
No way. I think it's...
I mean, in Britain, they don't...
Speaking for myself...
It doesn't work like that in Britain.
But I think I'm a strong believer in the process of editing, and I think that every writer, when I write things, I always want an editor, and not every piece in this issue was edited beyond copy editing, but some pieces were, and I don't say that as a criticism. That because a piece goes through an editorial process, it doesn't mean that it is worse. Coming in, or that there's some fault with the author. Sometimes pieces are just very complicated, or an author has been working on it for a long time and can't see what someone who's reading it for the first time is going to see. But I was sometimes in the position of stepping in and making editorial suggestions to authors who had not encountered this before, and that had to be done delicately. And to sort of make this point that this was not a criticism, and that I was trying very hard. I'm not putting it in my own words. I'm not putting my own stamp on it. But from the reader's point of view, this is what I'm seeing, and I think that's the primary function of an editor is to simply communicate to the author, this is how I read this. I'm reading it this way. I may not be representative of every reader, but I am one reader who's read a lot of things, and this is what I'm seeing, and you can tell me, is that what you want? Is that what you intended? So that's from the editorial point of view, but working with the translators was crucial. I mean, we just would talk certainly about phrases. Tenses and chronology was something that was particularly interesting in this act of translation, and this might be, I'd be interested in.
Tenses are always a problem from Arabic to English.
It was really very tricky to establish when things happened and what was we're getting into the weeds a little bit, but what was an ongoing action and what was a one-time action, and making that transition, and trying to identify that for then the translator to say, well, in the Arabic this is what it says, or it's not clear, or we're supposed to have this general impression. So that was a major challenge.
Yeah. For me, well. It was quite a complicated process, because I would usually, most of the pieces I would select. I would, because of, well, as you said, as Jen said, in the Arab world, there's no tradition of editing. And before I started publishing widely in translation into English, I was more of the opinion that Youssef has used, that, there's no need for an editor, etc., etc. But now I think,
That's
okay, this is not what you said, but okay, for that opinion that Youssef didn't say, so I was close to the opinion which Youssef didn't, represent, that the editor is not needed. But then after many encounters with a lot of editors, especially from U.S. literary magazines, I'm published really widely in the U.S. literary magazines in translation, I came to the conclusion that editors are actually important in the sense, provided that they do not intervene with what you have to say, which is what happens in the world of publishing the commercial novel, where editors sometimes ask to change entire chapters, change the narrative, change the ending, la 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 la. All these things are, for me, these are the bad sides of editing, which are part of the commercial publishing area. But literary magazines do not function in that way. And this is why I found that they have a lot of valuable comments about structuring the sentence, sometimes because also their translations, the issue of tenses, are always misguiding the translator or whatever, because in the Arabic we tend to use tenses freely, unlike English, for example. So I intervened in some of the stories in Arabic, and then Jennifer would read the English translation. She would put editorial comments on how she sees the story, and we discussed that. And when we agree, we would relay that remark to the author to introduce, remove a sentence, maybe introduce something in the piece. And then the entire thing would go to a translation editor who would read both texts and also comment on the quality of translation before this magazine came into existence. So, and I think also this collaboration and discussion that went on, I think it was very interesting. And it also showed a lot of resistance from some of the writers who were not, accepting that somebody would comment on their writing, which is quite funny because for me as a writer, I would like to listen to people commenting on my writing, especially if they are involved in literary production, like editors or other writers. But there was this also, not all, but some, a few, were quite resistant, but at the end, with a lot of discussion, I think we found like a common ground to accommodate this novelty.
It's good. Common ground.
Yeah.
I have a follow-up question about this as well. When the magazine itself is beautiful. If you get a chance to put it in your hands when you walk out of here, please do. How did you make a decision about whether to publish the original next to the translation or just the translation? Like, what was your decision-making process about how it would look in the book?
You mean if we were going to do a bilingual version or not?
Yes.
That was just cost prohibitive.
Yeah.
For the most part, it would have been twice as long, and I mean that was the main thing. It would be phenomenal to be able to do a bilingual edition and to be able to serve both audiences. I think. I mean, our primary audience was an English-speaking audience, and if we were, catching that audience, that was the primary thing. But for funding allowed, I think bilingual would be great.
Right. Yeah. So I think the economics of the situation are something to bear in mind, especially for literary magazines and small presses in the U.S. Again, there's not a ton of funding available for them. Right. So I have one more question, and then I'm going to turn it over to the crowd for further Q&A. And that has to do with the scene, right, the Arabic fiction writing scene. And I just want to say, for those people in the room who are aspiring writers, the role of the literary magazine in the West is really crucial to your career. And that is to say, if you see yourself as an aspiring poet or someone who's writing short fiction, the typical flow in the United States is that you would write your poems, get your friends to read your poems, make edits to your poems, and then submit them to literary magazines. And you would submit to a number of literary magazines because now it's okay to simultaneously submit. And I'm old enough to remember when it was not okay to simultaneously submit because the administrative kerfuffle of that is just taxing. But now there's technology called Submittable. So you can submit your work to individual literary magazines, and then the editors will get back to you to let you know if you're published, if you're lucky enough to be published, or if your work has been rejected. And then you take those rejections, and then you learn from those rejections, and maybe you circulate more documents or more poems, more short stories out there. Maybe you get another couple of publications, and the next thing you know, maybe an agent or an editor is interested in you, and then you perhaps secure a book contract, or you win a prize for that manuscript of poems, and then you're off on your merry way as a, air quotes, legitimate poet and writer with many books behind you. But that is the role of the literary magazine in the US. It really is a sort of vetting and clearinghouse, a sort of kind of a gatekeeping function for young and aspiring writers. And when I say young, that's not even, I don't mean that chronologically. I just mean young in your career, right? Who knows how old you are when you start to write a poem or a short story. But that's the function of the lit mag in the West. What is the function of a literary magazine here? Are there literary magazines that you recognize and celebrate? what's the role of the editor? This is the tag-on question here. And is the flow of the work process the same? Is the flow toward a career as a writer the same here? What can you tell us?
I'm getting suicidal just thinking about the answers to those questions.
Sorry.
No. No and no. No, we don't really have. Do you have literary magazines in Jordan? We don't really have literary magazines.
No. I was just talking to Jan about it, I forgot who yesterday. So we have
I think
two.
it was just
to
this
you,
morning.
to you,
It was
this morning.
me.
Yeah. Travel to Jan. So we have two literary reviews. One that comes out of Jordan University and stays in the room where all the magazines are stacked next to the editor-in-chief's office, and one that is produced by the Ministry of Culture, and it stays in the warehouse of the Ministry of Culture. We had a very good tradition, I think, in the 50s, 60s, where we had Al-Adab or Adib. Or,
there used to be.
Even in Egypt, a lot of literary magazines, and they were quite playing the same role as you mentioned now, about how a writer would be introduced first through these literary magazines, but now,
I would say the main reason for that is there's no funding.
Yeah.
It used to be pretty much state supported or indirectly state supported, and that's over now for a variety of reasons. But and I'm glad it's over. But nothing has taken over from the state in terms of funding, right?
Yeah.
Because this is not, obviously this isn't a profit-making endeavor.
Right.
So I mean there are some initiatives. There are occasional sort of journals that usually have very specific ideas about writing, but usually don't last because there's not enough money and they don't sell enough.
Right.
What else was
You
I going
have
to
a
say?
site.
I have there are several things on online. Yes.
Yes.
That sort of perform that function, but yes, the main point I wanted to make is things are a lot less formal or formalized in the Arab world. So it does tend to involve friends and people you know personally and favors and things like that.
this is what I wanted to say actually.
Yeah.
That if you get published, it relies more on if you know the person behind that publication, that literary supplement in the newspaper.
Doesn't necessarily reflect quality or
Not at all.
vision
Not
or-
at all.
or
So there's
That's
this loss,
Yeah.
and once we have the social media out there, now it's like,
And there are social media. I mean,
the
this is an
mess,
example
the
of disastrous
big mess.
democratization in the sense
Yeah,
that there
yeah,
are social
yeah.
media stars
Yeah.
who are only known on social media
I see.
Yeah,
and whose writing isn't so
Yeah.
great, or representative even.
yeah.
But they're known because they're very popular
Yeah,
on
and
Facebook.
and now I think we have this trend of the Facebook stars, writers who are, in my opinion, are extremely rubbish writing, but they are bestsellers. They are so compiling books, and they are turning into bestsellers as well because of the whatever. Well, not to get me wrong, I'm all for free writing, whatever. It's bad writing, good writing, I don't mind. But I think, well, there's also another issue here of the loss of literary criticism and for all of these.
Yes, and the other thing, is these things also come out of educational institutions, which we don't really have in the Arab world. I mean, we have these old sort of government-supported universities that are very conservative, and increasingly kind of sectarianized and fundamentalized, if there is such a word. And nothing really very few things.
You opened a big subject. And there is also the issue of authority sponsoring certain writers, pushing them to the front. For example, in Jordan,
is this bleak enough for you? Should we go on?
All right, and good night, everyone. So I want to, before I turn this over to Q&A, I want to remember something y'all said earlier, which is that this is one of the first times you've been able to sort of sit together and have a conversation. And so I want to open it up to you first. Do you have questions for each other?
Well, I had one question for Hisham about the market when he says that he didn't choose based on the market. I'm just curious to know what he means by the market in the Arab context. Which market? Because the market is really, as far as I can see is really completely outside of the. I mean, books that sell because they're unlike books in the Arab world. Does that make sense? Books that sell because they're more like television serials or Facebook status updates.
Yeah.
Or,
That's the market.
that's okay.
Yeah, that's the market. I mean
Like
that.
mainstream mass market.
Yeah,
That's what you mean.
the mainstream mass market is really. I think it's kind of similar in the West,
Yeah.
but not quite so extreme. But really, anything that sells because it's unlike literature.
Yeah.
It's unlike fiction or unlike poetry, or it's extremely old-fashioned, or
Yeah.
it's relevant politically, or any reason other than the fact that it has literary merit or is an engaging read.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, for me, I think there's a huge trend in commoditizing literature, especially on bestsellers. And I have also this thesis about why the novel, why it is now the prevalent. I write short stories, and I will not, and I would not want to write a novel. But the publishers obviously won the novel. The big awards won the novel. Why the novel? This is one of my arguments is that it's the literary genre that is more able to be transformed into a commodity because it's like a series. So it's an easier read, not an easier write, but an easier read on the reader. The characters are usually well defined. Events are slowly developing over time towards an end, and the different characters are.
I would take issue with that.
Yeah, I know. I said most, not all, most. But in the short story form and in poetry, there's an effort that the reader should make in order to relate to the text, build on the text, explore the text, dig into the text, etc. So that makes it a tougher read when compared to most of the novels, not all of the novels. And that's why I think the publishing industry, either in the West or in the Arab region, which we don't have an industry, but the publishers, found that the novel is the best way to, commercialize or commodify literature.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. We have some time now for questions from the audience, and there are quite a few hands. And I don't know if there's a microphone that we're going to pass around, or maybe we're all just going to speak loudly. Perhaps. Maybe
There was
we'll
a
just-
microphone here.
It
Yeah.
disappeared. Our microphone disappeared.